Hello everybody, welcome to episode number 9 of the BIVBlog, Benedikt's IT video blog. My name is Benedikt Stockebrand and today I want to talk about configuration and configurables again. Now in the previous episode I've used this little silly contraption to explain that making things configurable can actually mean that they become pretty much useless. And today I want to talk a bit more seriously about the entire situation. Now, when we talk about configurables, configurable parameters that are, well, configurable to us in our jobs as system administrators, network administrators, IT architects, end users, or whatever, there are basically 4 different categories on configurables. The first one is configurables that are actually good. The good configurables are configurables that allow me as a user in the broadest possible sense to control the things, or to give control that allows me to achieve certain things. For example, this is a multimeter. Pretty cheap one, but for my purpose it does the job. Why? Well, I can measure DC voltage, AC voltage, okay, millivolts, that's a bit off, resistance, continuity, what else do I have here, current, milliampere current, up to 10 ampere current, temperature, and that's it. And these things are useful because they have this rotary switch. They are configurable. If they weren't, they'd be probably called single meters rather than multimeters. And the point here is that I configure them for the job that I want them to do, and at my abstraction level sort of thing. I don't have to set what sort of battery I put in there or whatever. It's just what I want to measure. So that's fairly reasonable. So those are good for configurables. Bad configurables are configurables that don't really make much sense from the user point of view. In the previous episode I already mentioned that ZIP, the session initiation protocol, has a whole zoo of these things where you have to configure things consistently between multiple devices, and from the functionality they don't make any difference, they just give you some extra trouble. Touchtone transmission, 3 different ways to do it, and there's no reason why there's 3 of them, because they don't do any different things, they just do the same thing in different ways and leave you to sort this out. So those are bad. Why are they bad? Because they cause work, they cause trouble, they make things break, you have to implement all of them, so you have more potential bugs, and so on and so on and so on. So these are the second class. Similar to that, now this is a USB to serial adapter, and this explains how these things happen. Serial interfaces are so prehistorically old, they come from a time where making things configurable would have been pretty much impossible or very troublesome, very expensive. So with these you have to configure the bitrate, you have to configure the number of start bits, number of stop bits, number of data bits, the kind of parity or no parity at all. And if you want to connect to the serial console of a device like, for example, that Cisco up here, it's already a major pain, which makes me personally just put a sticker on everything that has a serial console. Okay, use these parameters because that's what they support there. And that's bad configurables. These ones are historic, others are just like ZIP, they are just because people seriously screwed up, let's put it like this. And then there are configurables that are not bad, but they're ugly. They're good, the bad, no, they're ugly. What are ugly configurables? My personal favorite are disk storage systems. Why is that? You have to configure disk groups, volumes, stripe set size, RAID levels, and so on. And depending on what you want to do, you really want to put some thought in there. Why is that? Because to make these things work properly, you have to know about the stuff you want to run on them. So about, for example, that you want to put a database on there. And a long time ago, I had an alleged performance expert telling me how to configure some storage system for maximum performance. First of all, they picked the wrong storage system, which is another problem involved there. And it was supposed to run a database with redo logs, with table spaces, and with some raw file systems for the incoming data. It was sort of a batch system thing. And his statement was, well, Sun recommends wide, thin striping. RAID 5 blast everything on a single set of spindles, and that'd be it. Performance was disastrous, obviously. Not because the storage system was bad, it was, but that was a different story, but because this guy had no clue about performance, no clue about storage, except for some glossy thing he picked up from Sun, and he had no idea about performance parameters in relation to databases. And these configurables are ugly because you have to put in a lot of thought, learn more about databases and storage systems and the hard disks and the way they work than you actually want to. But to make these things work together, there's sometimes no way around it. It's ugly, but that's the way it is. Okay, so we've got good, the bad, and the ugly. Leaves the cute. So what are cute configurables? Cute configurables are configurables that don't really matter, but, well, give people a warm, fuzzy feeling and no pain if you just don't configure them or configure them stupidly. For example, ringtones on your cell phone or background images on your desktop. These don't really hurt. And with the ringtones, okay, they do have practical use, so you know it's your phone and not somebody else's, but they don't really cause any trouble. And why they're cute? Well, you also get these back panel things for your cell phones, you know, the pink ones with the Hello Kitty. Yeah, okay, maybe a bit too cute. Anyway, these are the basic categories of configurables we have and we have to deal with. Now, there's one topic missing here so far, which is a bit independent of this scheme, and that's default settings. Sometimes it is reasonable to come up with default settings and let people configure things differently afterwards, but even that can be troublesome. First of all, there's frequently the situation that whatever default setting you come up with, half the people can't really make use of it. And it's generally a good idea to avoid these things. Second, even worse problem, and we are back to the Cisco again, or to Sun Solaris system, but I don't have one up in there on the bookshelf. And that's when you have historic default settings. For example, the Cisco iOS has a default setting to enable stateful IP routing. Classful IP routing. And that's been pretty much useless for about, I don't know, 20-25 years. So one of the first things you learn to do when you have to deal with Cisco routers is whatever you do, you nuke whatever existing configuration there is, because you want to start from scratch. First thing you do is switch to classless routing. Historic thing. You find heaps and heaps and heaps and heaps of things like that on Solaris systems as well. And why do I mention both Cisco and Solaris? Not because they are cheap, buy once, throw away once, never buy again sort of equipment, but because they're quality and fairly expensive actually equipment. And they consider it important to keep some sort of continuity in their product lines. And that's what makes it very, very difficult to change default settings once they've been established, despite the fact that they are pretty much historic and no use at all. So even default settings do have significant drawbacks. Okay, so much about configuration, but there's still one question. Why should I actually care about that? Why do I sit here and do a video blog on this even? The answer is, when I work as some sort of IT architect, which is a pretty good part of my job, and I've done that a lot years ago, then I've done a bit more on IPv6 and whatever. But if you want to buy or pick, if it's open source, freely available, some sort of hardware, software product, I found it rather helpful to take a look at the configurables. What can I configure and what can't I configure? Are there decisions that I don't really want to make because it's the job of the developer or manufacturer? And it's also very helpful to embarrass salespeople at some trade fairs. And why is this, what's this for? And they come up with some sort of answer that sounds, well, not very logical, and still doesn't give you a clue what this is really about and why you should bother to configure it. And then you know there's a problem. And you tell them, okay, but why should I configure that? And where can I check how to configure it? Which leads to documentation as well. So it gives you an idea about the quality of a product. If you develop these sorts of things, you want to keep that in mind as well. And why does it give you an idea about the quality of this thing? Because everything that is configurable takes time to figure out what it's there for. It takes time to configure, to test, to document, and so on and so on and so on. So it's a matter of money. And despite the fact that I'm sitting here in a black t-shirt rather than suit and tie, doesn't mean that I shouldn't bother about money in my job. So this means it's going to take time to configure, it's going to cost us some money for the time we're sitting here, and that's frequently a bad sign. If there are too many configurables, there's a problem. And even more important, the question is, what happens when things go wrong? So you build a system, configure everything correctly, and it works fantastic. You put it into production, and then somebody adds some more stuff, configures things, and then changes the configuration on the existing stuff so things work together, and all of a sudden something else doesn't work anymore on a production system. These things shouldn't happen, but they do. And that means every configurable will negatively affect reliability. And it also means that if there is whatever sort of problem and you eventually decide, okay, I just check everything in the configuration, it means checking things, finding the actual problem will take longer, even if the particular configurables don't have anything to do with the problem. It's because they sort of hide the actual problem. So you want to be aware of that. Make sure that what you need to configure to get the functionality you need is there, but don't get over impressed with all sorts of other configurables that just are irrelevant to you. So much about that, and the more serious background behind this little nonsense thing. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did and watched this on YouTube, give it a thumbs up. If you want to discuss, come over to the forum at www.stepladder-it.com/BIVBlog/9, and otherwise hopefully see you again next year. Bye.